Marvel Studios can learn a lot from the success of X-Men 97. And here's what I mean by that. Recently, Brad Winterbaum, the head of Marvel Television, came out and said that the success of X-Men 97 was informing a lot of what they were doing with the live-action X-Men in Marvel films. But there is a part of me, and maybe it's just residual effects from Phase 4 and some of Phase 5, there's a part of me that's afraid that they're still going to think small. And the reason why I say that is a lot of what we saw in the first 10 years. Now, the first 10 years were very nostalgic and still are very nostalgic for a lot of us who saw those movies beginning with Iron Man 1 and just lived through the first 10 years, going to those movies all the time, seeing how it all led up to Infinity War, and then watching Infinity War and Avengers Endgame unfold with this kind of finality, right, that almost made it feel like the Marvel Cinematic Universe was officially shutting its doors. But when it comes to characters like Iron Man and Captain America and Thor and so on, in a lot of ways, they don't really cross over with the X-Men. Captain America is a big exception, and I'll talk about that here in a minute, because Wolverine became Wolverine because of Captain America. But you don't necessarily see the X-Men crossing over in terms of like teaming up with the Avengers and the X-Men. There have certainly been stories where they've faced off against each other over the years in Marvel Comics, or where they've teamed up. And in fact, during the story of Avengers versus X-Men, Cyclops basically soloed the Avengers and the X-Men at the same time. It was pretty dope. We actually covered that here on the channel. I'll post a link to it at the end of this video. But conventional wisdom would say that while the X-Men are seemingly out in their own little world, that while as a team they usually are, in terms of their history, they are not. And that's the point that I'm making here, is the first 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe were so nostalgic because of the world building. Because of small little moments like Captain America's shield appearing in the background of an Iron Man film, Thor's hammer landing in New Mexico, the fact that we were on this journey where all these characters were in some form or fashion tied to one another, and that they were all going to team up, of course, playing out in the Avengers film, and things were going to start going sideways over the course of time, leading to the inevitability of Thanos getting the Infinity Gauntlet. But with regards to the X-Men 97 show, this really brought a lot of those feelings back. Morph had so many cameos in this show, characters that he turned into. He turned into Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, he turned into the Incredible Hulk, and so many more. We saw Dr. Doom appearing as a cameo, we saw Captain America showing up in a cameo. And in fact, the appearance of Mary Jane Watson in the finale of X-Men 97 Season 1 was a callback to a major plot thread of Spider-Man the Animated Series. And so all these little Easter eggs and cameos and so on felt very similar to the first 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think keeping that feeling alive is of the utmost importance here. Here's a really good example. What if I told you that Wolverine as you know him, with the adamantium claws and all that kind of stuff, that he only got to that place and only exists in that form because of a combination of Mr. Sinister, Captain America, and the Wakandans. And had it not been for any one of those three combinations, he wouldn't exist in his current form. This is certainly something that you could involve in the Marvel Cinematic Universe or adapt in some capacity, but in the comics, it played out like this. Most of you guys know that Steve Rogers was just some scrawny kid who was given the super soldier serum and became Captain America, that he goes out into World War II and that he basically fights against the Germans and is ultimately frozen in a block of ice. He's discovered some number of years later and then joins the Avengers. What you don't know is this: Captain America was not some arbitrary project in order to turn an average guy into a super soldier for the purpose of rallying the morale of US troops and the American public. He was actually part of a larger program called Weapons Plus, which was basically a project designed to contain and control, and if need be, eradicate the mutant population. Captain America was Weapon 1. The intention was to send Captain America out into the field during World War II as a test, that if he proved to be successful, he'd be brought back, his mind would be wiped, he'd be given new memories that were largely anti-mutant memories, and then he would go forward in a new line of super soldiers. Such as it was, he of course was frozen in a block of ice. But before that happened, he traveled to Africa during World War II, and he faced off against the Germans alongside a guy named King T'Challa, the grandfather of T'Challa the Black Panther. there. Now, when he was fighting alongside the Wakandans, what he realized is they were using circular shields, where he was using an iron shield. And because Wakandans were using circular shields, that they could be used both offensively and defensively. And so because of Captain America's efforts, he was given a shard of vibranium as a thank you. And he brought that shard of vibranium back to the States. He told the US government, make me a new shield using this vibranium and make it round. And so the project was handed over to a guy named Myron McClain. Now, much like the project that created penicillin, Myron McClain fell asleep at the wheel. And when he woke up, he discovered the shield for Captain America had been created, but was composed of a series of elements that he couldn't quite figure out. And so he tried to duplicate it. And when he did, he accidentally created adamantium. Now, while this is going on, there is a guy by the name of Kenji Oyama, who was part of the Japanese forces, specifically a kamikaze fighter. Now, ultimately, he ends up failing, and he ends up going forward as a guy named Lord Darkwind. But once the adamantium created by Myron McClain reached the open market, Lord Darkwind figured out a way to bond adamantium to the human skeleton. Not only that, during World War II, Nathaniel Essex was in Auschwitz. He was experimenting on various mutants in order to better understand the nature of mutant physiology. Now, of course, the concentration camps are liberated by Captain America and his forces, and so Nathaniel Essex flees, leaving all of his information behind. Eventually, all these things come together in one cohesive moment, kismet, if you want to call it that, when a guy named Truett Hudson travels to the former Auschwitz camp, discovers the journals of Mr. Sinister, and then brings them back to the States. And because Captain America was frozen in a block of ice, there was no way to extract the super soldier serum from his body. And because Abraham Erskine was dead, there was no way to duplicate the super soldier serum. Weapons Plus just created a whole bunch of other projects, Weapons 2 through 9. But the bigger point here is that Truett Hudson brought the journals of Mr. Sinister back to the States and then launched Weapon X, using all the information he'd gleaned from the nature of mutant powers and how those things manifest and so on and so forth. During this time, Wolverine was part of a group called Team X. They were a Black Ops wet work team working for the United States government during the Cold War. They took out all kinds of targets, right? Dictators and political enemies and so on and so forth. When Weapon X is launched, Wolverine and his guys are all brought in. And using the information from Sinister's diaries, they realized the nature of Wolverine's healing factor, that he could heal from virtually anything. And because Lord Darkwind had learned how to bond adamantium to the human skeleton, that technology was taken by Weapon X, and adamantium was bonded to the skeleton of Wolverine. They tried to mentally condition him, didn't quite work. He ultimately escaped and then went on the run, and his whole story unfolds from there. Here's another example. The villain Apocalypse, right? That guy had been around since the days of ancient Egypt. His rise to power coincided with Cain the Conqueror traveling back to the days of ancient Egypt because he realized how powerful Apocalypse would become. And he wanted to basically bring him in and make him his protege. Such as it was, the Fantastic Four followed Kang into the past and then basically defeated him, sending him fleeing back to the future, and then Apocalypse just sort of went forward from there. Now, the Fantastic Four didn't really know what was going on with Apocalypse. They didn't realize that the person they saved was the villain that would go on to become this effective demigod in Marvel Comics. But once Apocalypse rose to power, became the villain that we knew, he eventually fights Thor. In fact, Thor's magical hammer, Jarnbjorn, was enchanted specifically so he could defeat Apocalypse, because at that point in time, he hadn't gained the ability to wield his own hammer yet. Things like this are how the X-Men tie into the greater Marvel universe. And there's so many other examples. There's a ton of other examples out there. And I think that is a very important thing for Marvel Studios to keep in mind. Because when I sit down, and I imagine you probably feel the same way, when you sit down and you think about the first 10 years of the MCU, it's less about some really cool scenes. I mean, there certainly were. There were definitely cool moments over the course of the MCU. And honestly, Winter Soldier is still the best movie that they made. But it's more of a feeling. It's a feeling that you kind of long for. I wish I could feel the way I did when I watched the first 10 years of Marvel movies. Now, some of those feelings you'll never get back, right? You'll never experience what it was like to see the Marvel Universe unfolding and growing for the very first time. Now you know too much and nothing's ever going to be the same. But the idea of world building, right? Going back to our other example, Captain America's shield appearing in the background of an Iron Man film, Thor's hammer landing in New Mexico, those can easily be done. And I'm afraid that Marvel Studios isn't going to do that. I'm afraid that Marvel Studios, in their desire to make their universe so incredibly accessible, that they're not going to trust the moviegoer. They're not going to trust the average person. And they're going to create these very, very simplistic films involving the X-Men, which is going to be very two-dimensional storytelling, and that it's not going to live up to what the X-Men could actually be, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Do you feel the same way? Do you disagree? I'm kind of curious, but it's just a fear that I have. So anyway, make sure you guys check this video out where we talk about how Cyclops basically crushed the Avengers and the X-Men by himself. It's amazing. And I will catch you all later. Peace.